Good afternoon. My name is Tom Haregrove. I'm an extension specialist, extension veterinarian with the Department of Animal Science at Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. Today we're going to talk a little bit about bovine viral diarrhea. One of the issues with BVD is that some states are actually trying to develop a program, sort of a pseudo-regulatory program on BVD. There's starting to be a lot more concern about the virus. So what I hope to do with this is just bring a little update about the virus, how the virus works, and why it's important. Okay, so BVD basics. BVD is an RNA virus. It was discovered back in the mid-40s. Initially, diarrhea was recognized as a primary lesion, and so hence the name BVD. Unfortunately, it causes a lot of other problems. A lot of reproductive loss, a lot of abortions, and then it has the distinct ability to produce a persistently infected or PI calf that we're going to talk about a little bit later in this presentation. So the biggest threat that BVD has to the beef cattle industry is the reproductive performance. Unfortunately, we don't recognize reproductive performance a lot until we're trying to wean the calves, or we're counting our calves, after they've calved, or at branding, or when we're weaning them. So it's called a subclinical disease. Most of those cattle, when they get infected, the cows get infected with BVD, they're not going to show a lot of signs, but BVD is going to cause a lot of reproductive loss. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that in a minute. Okay, so BVD basics continued. The virus causes an impaired response by the immune system. In other words, this virus is termed immunosuppressive, or if animals have this virus or subject to this virus, then they become much more susceptible to things like calf scours, calf pneumonia, all kinds of bacterial diseases that cattle might have. And so there's even some reports say if you've in endemic anaplasmosis area, you get some BVD in there, you're likely to have more problems with anaplasmosis. And just any disease in general, it impairs the immune response. The virus is associated with the respiratory disease complex, or some of us know it's shipping fever. And this is where it's usually recognized by producers and veterinarians. In other words, there, we looked at the iceberg a while ago. The iceberg gets turned upside down. There we see a big effect. So we have cattle dying. We have a lot of more calves getting sick. And then we go in and we discover it's BVD, and then we're trying to control it there. We really need to be looking at controlling BVD more back at the cow-calf sector. And so again, can't stress the importance of it is, in other words, the only way they're going to become PIs is when they're infected in the cow. And again, we're going to explain that better. Okay. The other neat thing about this virus, or I say neat thing, the other thing about this virus is it has the ability to continually adapt to its environment, and it's constantly changing. So this virus is constantly altering itself. So it can be, and again, the way it lives in the environment, the way it has to live in an animal and has to stay there sufficiently till it can progress to another animal. Okay, so the way it stays in the environment is through living in an animal. If we put BVD out on the ground, it's not like Johne's or lepto or some of these other diseases that's going to be there for a long time. BVD will be gone pretty fast. That virus is very susceptible to heat, light, etc. So the way it's kept in nature is in animals, and specifically PI animals. Okay, so it has the ability to cause this persistent infection. Now, only about 0.5% of all cattle in the United States are persistently infected. But their presence is a high risk to the industry. And as we're talking about this and going through, you can understand as we talked, how much this virus, in other words, one of these PI calves can infect several animals, potentially hundreds of animals. Okay, beef cattle production is built on reproduction, right? So if we're going to make a living running cows, first thing, that cow's got to become pregnant. Okay, if you've got a lot of BVD or you got BVD circulating in there, you could impair pregnancies, right? But the next thing is she's got to deliver a live calf. Again, BVD can interfere with that calf. She might become pregnant. She might get pretty much through or halfway through gestation or all the way through gestation and deliver a dead calf or a weak calf, right? And then she's got to wean a calf. So again, some of these calves are born, they look pretty normal at birth, but we lose them to calf diarrhea, calf pneumonia, whatever, before we ever get to wean them. So again, BVD can really cause a wreck in any of these stages of reproduction. Okay, so how does a fetus become a PI and remain persistently infected with BVD for life? Okay, can't stress that enough. Once she becomes persistently infected, a PI, that animal will shed that virus for the rest of its life. Okay, so let's kind of look at this little schematic. This is BVD infection during gestation. So basically, all I'm trying to, this middle line here is just a gestation of a cow. We're using 283 days. But if we go in and that cow is infected, or if she's bred by an infected bull or whatever, but if she gets infected at day 0 or the day she breeds, then many times she could carry that calf all the way through. But many times she's just that pregnancy is not going to go forward anymore. So she's going to be a repeat breeder. So you're going to see her back in the next estrus cycle, right? Okay, then looking at the blue line on the bottom where it got persistent infection. Okay, usually this is the biggest risk, about 90 days. But it can go from, actually there's persistently infected calves from day 0 where they were subjected from day 0 up to about 125. But that day 90 is about the time, in other words, that's the optimum time for that virus to, if it infects the fetus is not developed, the immune system of that fetus is not developed enough at that time that it recognizes that BVD as a foreign virus or a foreign agent, right? So basically what happens if BVD attacks that fetus along in that 58 to 125 day, more around that 90-day period, that virus becomes part of that fetus. So basically that fetus will shed that virus for the rest of its life, and there's nothing that's going to stop the viral shedding. Okay, so I practiced for several years, and people are always, well, if I give it enough of this or enough of that, will it happen? The answer is no. You will never. In other words, once that animal is persistently infected, it is persistently infected for life. Okay. So that's basically what we're trying to show here, is the same thing in the schematic before. So we have a cow, and that cow did get infected with BVD, and it did get through to the calf in the uterus. That's what we're trying to depict in here. BVD infection, the big red BVD infection on the cow is the calf. So what happens is, one thing, we could get delayed breeding, right? Or that's saying that virus got through to the calf or through the reproductive system. So yeah, we could have delayed breeding, just like we talked about. Then we could have an abortion or stillbirth. We could have that any time during gestation. So they could have, abort any time due to BVD. Okay, again, that persistent infection, remember that key deal is around 3 months, around 90 days is when you're most likely to become infected and become persistently infected. Okay, now there's some calves, if they're infected later in gestation, then basically what happens is they develop an immune response. They'll have antibodies, and we used to think they didn't show any signs of BVD. What we've found in the last 10, 15 years is those calves do not tend to feed as well. They're more likely to get sick or die during the feeder phase. So basically, we want to keep BVD out of our cow herd if at all possible. Okay. Now, one of the things that I didn't cover back a while ago in the schematic is those cows that get infected from about 5 months. In that little period of there, the nervous system is one of the last things to develop in the calf, in the fetus. So what happens if that BVD virus gets in there, say at 100 days, 120 days, 140 days, then what happens is it's going to go in and affect the nervous system. So what we'll see then is calves that are born, they'll have difficulty walking. They'll have a lot of cataracts in their eyes. They'll be, they don't seem like they're aware of their surroundings. In other words, their nervous system, their brain just does not develop it. The virus kind of arrests the brain development. Okay? So now we've got our PI calf on the ground. So the little calf in the middle, that's what we're trying to show. This is a PI calf. Again, it constantly sheds the virus. Now, we used to think these calves would die real soon after birth, and many of them do. But, 20 years ago, we found a pretty high-dollar bull in a bull stud that was actually a persistently infected animal. So again, a lot of our thoughts have changed over the years and are continuing to change about BVD. It's a very complex subject. But let's look, and so if we're looking to the left of the screen, then we see a cow up there with a big calf in it, right? So if that cow is infected, again, if that fetus was about 90 days, then we're likely to produce another PI calf, right? If that cow's a little bit older, then we're liable to get a calf that has neurologic dysfunction, or she could abort any time. Okay. Now, let's look at the bottom left, and we've got two little calves down there. What we say earlier about this virus is associated with shipping fever, or BRD, causes immunosuppression, so they're more likely to get pneumonia, calf scours, things like that. Well, these calves, their immune system is not really developed real well as an adult, certainly. So again, if these are our herd mates and they're running around out there, these little calves, you've got a BVD, a PI animal in there, you're going to have a lot more calf diarrhea, you're going to have a lot more calf pneumonia, you're going to have a lot bigger calf loss, hence you're going to have fewer calves to wean, okay? And you're going to wean calves of lighter weight. Now if we look up to the top right, this cow and calf, they could both develop the same deal. The calf could develop pneumonia in this case, or the cow could develop an infection that's going to keep her from breeding. She wouldn't be a PI, but it's going to impair her reproduction for the next year. So again, that PI, if you got a PI circulating in your cows during breeding season, then you're likely to have more PIs next year, okay? And then the last one is talking about bulls. If bulls become infected before they reach puberty, say a bull calf here, and we're saying, we're in a seed stock operation or whatever, we're selling bulls, then there's a potential that those bulls could be infected for months or maybe for years in their semen. Very difficult to diagnose, but they're passing BVD in their semen. So again, our whole aim ought to be to try to prevent the birth of PI calves, and then to make sure by testing and stuff that we don't keep these animals in the herd. Okay. So, first thing that we think about as producers and as veterinarians when it comes to a control program is a vaccination program. And so we have a lot of information out there. Okay, we need a modified lot. No, we need to kill. No, we need to do this. No, we need to do that. Okay, so 2 or 3 things I want to talk about first is read the label on the vaccine. If the vaccine says not to give to calves, nursing cows, then don't give it to them. If it says don't give it to pregnant cows unless they've received the vaccine in the previous 12 months or whatever, then don't give it to them. If it says not to give it to pregnant cows, don't give it to pregnant cows. Some modified lives are labeled for pregnant cows under certain circumstances. They've been vaccinated in the last several months period of time, usually about a year. But again, always read the label. Most of the real problems that I've found with vaccine failure or vaccine wrecks is people didn't read the label. And they assumed because, their neighbor said this or somebody said that or a modified live was labeled for this, so all modified lives are equal. That's not the case. Always read the label. Other thing that's going to affect your vaccination program, how often do you gather your cows? If you gather your cows one time a year to preg check them and strip the calves off of them, then probably a modified life is not the way you want to go because you're going to be vaccinating a lot of pregnant cows. Now again, there's some other things. If you was all your cows in the herd had been vaccinated as heifers and then added in, but again, those are things you need to really consider before you jump on a vaccine. Now, before I go any further, when you sit down with a vaccine program, you need to sit down with your local veterinary practitioner. Whoever you call out in the middle of the night to pull your calves and stuff like that, that's the person you need to be talking. He understands your area, he understands your herd, he understands things much better. So to make a general recommendation is impossible. But again, I'm just going to tell you that's the first person you need to visit with. Okay. Other things to be considered is what's the length of your breeding season. If you've got a real short breeding season, a fairly defined breeding season, then you might be able to use them, or you would be able to use a modified live and not be exposing a lot of pregnant cows. But again, you've got a very narrow window to do that. So, and if you're giving a kill product, you always want to make sure, like I said, read the directions. First year, 2 doses. So, and I deal with that a lot. Person says, well, I wasn't going to run through. I give them 1 dose. Well, you're just halfway doing the job. Okay. And then the next thing, do you raise or do you purchase replacements? So again, very important. If you're raising replacements and you're selling them to the public, then you need to have a pretty good program, a biosecurity program for BVD, or your reputation's going down the tank if people realize that you might have BVD in your herd and you're in fact selling some cows that are pregnant that are going to produce more PIs in other herds. The same way purchasing replacements. So if I'm purchasing pregnant cows, I've got to realize I can test that cow, but just because that cow's negative doesn't mean the calf inside her is. So I've got to test those calves after they're born. And the sooner after they're born, probably the better, because the longer that they stay in the herd, the more virus they're going to spread. Okay? Vaccine safety versus efficacy. So again, I can't stress this enough. The vaccine that I'm using for reproductive purposes for BVD has to be, it's got a different level than what I'm going to be putting into calves to prevent them from, or to try to control pneumonia and stuff like that. That vaccine, if it's for reproductive diseases, it's got to keep that virus from getting through. In other words, we can't just say, like with some other conditions, well, we slowed the virus down, right? Or we didn't cause as much disease, so they got better. We didn't cause them to get as sick, and they got well faster. So we didn't prevent the disease. For reproductive purposes, we have to make sure that that virus does not get through to that calf. So again, the requirements for a vaccine for reproduction are much more stringent than it is for, for vaccinating stockers for pneumonia, whatever. Okay. Modified live versus killed, and this comes around every few years. I want to stress enough: read the label, use the vaccine according to the label. So, are modified lives good? Yeah. Are killed vaccines good? Certainly. They both have their place. So I'm not saying one is necessarily better than the other. They both have advantages. They both have disadvantages. So how much risk am I willing to take? In other words, there is a little bit of risk with a modified live product. Again, what we say, BVD causes the immune system to be suppressed a little bit. We're putting in a modified live virus. That virus shouldn't cause the disease, but it could cause a little bit of immunosuppression. In fact, it does. That's pretty much documented. So again, doesn't cause a lot of immunosuppression, but there's a little bit. So there's a little risk there, right? Now again, kill vaccines, as a rule, tend to not have that problem. But as a rule, modified live vaccines tend to be a little bit more effective than kill vaccines because they're coming more from the natural route of exposure. In other words, the virus in nature gets in, replicates. If it's in a, not in a calf, not in a fetus to produce a PI, but in a cow or a calf, it replicates. If you get over it, then you have pretty good immunity. And it's kind of like, getting the flu. You get over it, you're not likely to get it again until next year, right? So, then what's your level of management? Do you have the facilities to put them up and vaccinate them? There's a lot of things that's going to affect your vaccination protocol. And do you have a controlled breeding season? And if you do have a controlled breeding season, what's the length of that system? Okay. So BVD control measures. So one of the things, there are tests that I can look to determine if the animal's PI. And so usually what we do with those tests is we use the ear notch, right? And there's nothing special about the ear. You're looking for the BVD antigen, or actually the BVD virus in skin. And in those persistently infected animals, it tends to accumulate in the skin. So it's a very good test. Is it tested 100%? No test is 100%. But those tests are pretty accurate. As far as tests go, they're very accurate. But again, make sure that you use that test the way that it's labeled to use. So a lot of people say, well, that test cost $5 or $10 or whatever that test cost for one animal. But I can do 5 animals on that same test and save some money. How much accuracy do I lose when I start trying to do 5 tests on a test that's designed for 1? And so I certainly do not recommend pooling samples. I think if you're going to go to the testing, if you're going to go to all of that labor and stuff involved in getting the notches and the expense of getting them shipped and collected and everything, then you need to do it right. Okay, so test your purchases. If you're buying cows, it's good to test the cows. Only about 10% of the calves that are PI, their mother was PI. Now, if a PI animal gets to adulthood, say a female, she's always going to have PI calves because she's always shedding the virus, so all of her progeny are going to be PI. Okay, but that only happens about 10% of the time. Most of the time, the reason you get a PI is you've got a cow that doesn't have protection, the vaccine or whatever. She gets subjected to a virus. The virus gets through to the fetus and then develops in the fetus and again becomes part of the fetus if it's about that 90-day period, and here we go with another PI. Okay, when you purchase cattle, if you can, and I realize this doesn't fit everybody's situation, but if you can manage them as a separate unit. Now again, everybody kind of looks at you, well, that's not going to happen. Well, if that's not going to happen, make sure when those calves are being born that you test those calves when they hit the ground. So if you get an ear notch out of those calves and you test them and they're negative, then you can feel much better about, okay, things are looking good, right? Now, again, if you can test those calves possibly before they get colostrum, which might fit into some people's situation, most it won't, then if you have, the test is not, could potentially not be as accurate for a little period of time right after birth due to the high colostrum, because again, we're trying to look at antigen or the virus, and if there's enough antibodies from that cow that she's passed through the colostrum, you could kind of block that calf from being detected early. just keep all those things in mind as you're testing. Again, sit down, have this long discussion with your veterinarian. How's the best way to test my calves? When's the best time to test them? Where's the best place to send them? Will you help me interpret my results? Understand the risks from your neighbors. So you can be doing everything great, and then if your neighbor is a stocker operator, you're getting a lot of commingled cattle in, fences are maybe not too well or whatever, then there's a real risk to your. In practice, I've seen that not real uncommon. A guy had some heifers over there, fairly naive. Somebody come in, a neighbor, he leased some stuff out, put a bunch of stockers in there, hot wire. Anyway, the cattle commingled, and then bingo, we have a train wreck with BVD in a cow herd. Okay, and again, a vaccination program is essential, but you need to make sure that there's a lot of thought process goes into the vaccination program. Okay, management for BVD. Okay, if I purchase animals, I can quarantine them, but for how long am I going to quarantine them? So again, if it's wise to test females when you buy them, because theoretically 10% of the time you might pick up a PI cow. I think it's that's pregnant, but not likely. But again, it would be good to test them. But very, very, very important to test those calves when they hit the ground. Again, can't stress this enough. Use that test as labeled. If that test is designed to do one animal, don't try to do 5 or 10 or 12 or whatever, because to save a few dollars, just think how much BVD is going to cost you if you miss one. Okay? And then again, vaccination, but put a lot of thought into your vaccination program. Okay, so this is just kind of a quick run to BVD. Again, a very, very complex subject and a very complex disease. I think we're gonna, as time goes on, we're learning something new about BVD every year. I would recommend that some states around the United States, more in the Midwest, whatever, actually have and are developing BVD programs that are regulatory in nature. So again, be thinking about how that you want to control this disease. If you're shipping cattle out or whatever, how can I feel better that I'm shipping cattle out that don't have the disease? And certainly if I'm purchasing cattle, I don't want to purchase the disease. So again, thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions at all about BVD, my email's attached here, as is my office and my cell phone, and I'd be glad to answer any questions at all. And thank you very much for your time.